Welcome, everybody, to Onchain Alpha. This is a weekly podcast where we explore the world of on-chain data. We unpack valuable insights, novel applications of on-chain data together with the people who are building the most innovative data infrastructure, analytics platforms, and writing your favorite threads and articles. Please make sure to sign up to our newsletter. It's going to be linked in the description below. Onchain Alpha is made possible through the generous support of projects like Mosaic, the Loyalty Rewards Protocol for on-chain brands and their fans, the Optimism Collective, scaling Ethereum's present to provide funding for its future, and Bankless DAO, a decentralized community on a mission to help the world go bankless. Today, we're talking to Umar, data researcher and analyst at Gitcoin. Some of the topics of conversation today are going to be: what are public goods? What is Regen data? Why is it important that we build with public goods data? And then, of course, touching on Gitcoin data for quadratic funding, Sybils, and impact. Umar, how are you doing?
Hey, man. Doing good. Happy to be here.
Thrilled to have you.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, man. We've been talking for a minute now. So this just feels like just another call.
For real. I feel like we started talking back with the Citizens Round. And you are the data dude who really started like hopping into these Twitter spaces you were having on the Citizens Round and hosting your own and just creating a great vibe and a great community around it. I mean, like, you just really listening deeply to people and also just like creating a space for people to talk about it, which was so cool. And then continuing to talk since then with all of your cool work around Mosaic and the stuff that you're building out there. That's really exciting.
Yeah, thank you. I appreciate that. You know, I mean, if there's anything that can be said about me is that I definitely like to make space for people to be able to share what they're doing, you know, build their rep. At least with Crypto Sapiens, that's what I've been doing for almost 3 years, if not over 3 years. Gosh, just time flies by. So I'm just grateful to be able to talk to people like you and really just elevate the conversation because, you know, some of it can be a little degenerative. But we're talking about Regen today, which to me, that's like a huge thing. And obviously, Gitcoin is a pioneer, I think, in the space of like just regenerative crypto economics. Regen data, which we're definitely going to touch on a lot today. So why don't you just give us an intro to you and how you got into crypto and when and how you joined Gitcoin too?
So I got into crypto, I think about two years ago, 2.5 years ago. And I was onboarded really through hackathons because I saw this cool crypto thing. I was like, I want to learn more about this. But I don't want to just learn about it in the abstract. I want to learn by doing. So there's this ETH Global Hackathon that was focused, especially at the time, on public goods. And I aped in, you know, got together with little hackathon team. And I remember just like listening to some of the speakers at this event and being so like blown away by what they were trying to do. And just like trying to create public goods in crypto that people could benefit from and not just using it to, you know, make profit, although obviously that's always good too. But using it to like give people something. And I got really interested in how you could use crypto for like journalism or science. Like, could you use it to make it easier for people to share information? And especially in countries where, you know, sharing particular information could get you in trouble, could crypto provide this like censorship resistance, private communication method for people to just share that information publicly or broadly? Obviously, this is in you know, my introduction to crypto, so I did not know much about the technical workings of it and how you actually do these things. But that was kind of what excited me. And when I was like poking around, talking about like, hey, could we do something where journalists could get like their news onto crypto protocols in a private censorship-resistant way, I ran into this group who was doing something for letting scientists share what they were doing, and in particular, creating a system where you could like, you know, basically do research and get funded for it without being in traditional academia. And that was really cool. We got together, we started working on this project. Killed it at the hackathon. I was like, damn, I got really lucky. I ran into amazing people. We crushed this project. And we we pretty much won a couple of prizes at the hackathon, and we were all so excited. We were like, let's keep building this, let's keep going. And I think that's the energy that brought us to Gitcoin, because we were like, look, we can't get by on vibes alone. We need funding. And so we came to Gitcoin, and we tried to raise funding, but to be honest, in our first round, we raised like $300. And I was like, I can't survive on $300, right? So I was, also just like hanging around Gitcoin a lot at the time, and, coming into Twitter spaces, coming to some Discord calls, just talking to people. And one of the people at Gitcoin at the time, Fred, he was like, hey, Umar, you're around a lot. You're really great. We should do some work together. And I was like, I'm down. What would I do? And he said, well, actually, I've been writing the newsletter for a while, and I would love if someone would take it over. So that was how I got started at Gitcoin. I was just writing the newsletter, and I put it out weekly. I would read everything on the governance forum and summarize it. Those were the days, I remember reading so many Owaki Gov posts. Kevin Owaki, our founder, is also just like a legendary writer, and he was constantly putting out these thought pieces on the forum. And so I was just like reading them every week and summarizing them. And I have to be honest, 80% of the content I had to summarize were his or his posts on the Gov forum. But that was exciting. And, since I started working at Gitcoin, that was an income for me. And gradually, the hackathon project didn't really go anywhere. It fizzled out, as they often do. And while working at Gitcoin, I saw that we had a ton of data that no one was doing anything with. So that sort of brought me into the data side of things, because before Gitcoin, I was a data analyst, I was a machine learning engineer, I was building computer vision models, and I had the skill set to pick up some of the data work here. So eventually that became my full-time role. That's what I do now at Gitcoin, is a lot of data stuff. And I was lucky enough to find someone who I could pass the newsletter off to, who's done a great job with it, Rohit, who then passed it off to someone else as well. So that was kind of it, man. That was my hackathon to Regen pipeline.
Ah, man, that's awesome. One of the reasons why I love doing this is I feel like I get so much more alpha into like people and what they do, where they come from, and like just really just get a good sense of their vibe. I feel like I said, I think we've talked several times now already, and I didn't really know about like your machine learning background. I didn't know that you were running the newsletter. So yeah, I think I mentioned it off camera, but for me, one of the things that Cryptosapiens stands for is to learn about the humanity of the people that are building the space, because sometimes it's really hard to get lost in just pure, technical complexities.
Yeah. Right. Techno battle.
Yeah. So you talked about kind of the funnel, which is the DAO funnel, in terms of how people can get involved. And for me, that's definitely one of the things that resonated so much a couple of years ago when DAOs were like the hyped thing in Web3, was anybody can get involved, find something that's interesting to you, just start contributing to it. Sure, you might not get paid, a fair wage, but it's really just something that is supposed to be fun. And then hopefully we can find financial constructs that allow us to reward people more fairly, which then brings us to like Gitcoin and kind of like how you came to Gitcoin Grants, or to Gitcoin to participate in their grants. Can you talk a little bit more, but you don't have to get so deep into it because this is definitely not a Gitcoin Grants podcast, but what are some of the things that you've seen kind of the grants do really well? And then maybe you can correlate that with some of the data that is coming through and how that data is helping to improve Gitcoin Grants in the future.
I can't resist, because you brought this up in the beginning part about like DAOs and like how it was, so easy to get involved and start contributing and making money. And, I feel like it was a lot easier 2 years ago to do that, like because of the bull market. And now we're in the bear, and all of these, treasuries are suddenly feeling tight. There's like layoffs everywhere. And I'm a little worried about the future of DAOs. Like, I don't know, like if it takes just a little bit of pressure for us to start start retreating from some of those ideals, then it's not really, it's not really that DAO like, but maybe we could come back to some of that and make it easier again for people to get onboarded, and ideally create ways for people to get onboarded that never go away, that are always there. And I would definitely love to pick your brain on what you think about DAOs and just like where you think they're going, and especially maybe sometime on or now if you're open to it, about like data.
Yeah, definitely. Let's go.
Yeah.
I was actually going to ask you, since you're digging into this, and this is absolutely fine. Do you think it's DAO ops that's causing some of the, I don't want to call it issues because that's too big a word, but some of the maybe receding of excitement behind DAOs? Or do you think it's pure tokenomics and just token values, because what people used to be able to get paid in tokens are kind of almost worthless at this point, because the market really affected, I think, a lot of these DAO treasuries? Or is it something else, like something that we're missing, that we haven't really figured out very well yet?
I feel like it's all of the above. Like, it's like it's the treasury and it's the ops. I mean, like DAOs, no one really knows, I think, yet how to create super well working DAOs. Especially the hard part, I guess, with I forget where I saw this, but someone made a triangle of like decision making. And it's like on one end you have speed, on another end you have quality, and on another point you have decentralization or the number of people involved. And it's like that classic thing of like pick 2 out of 3, but it's also like if you want faster decisions, then you will probably have to sacrifice how many people are involved. If you want higher quality decisions, then you'll have to sacrifice speed. If you want more people involved, you'll have to sacrifice maybe speed and some of those. So it's kind of like, where are we optimizing for? And it feels like when treasuries are tight, lots of people default to optimizing for speed, because we got a burn rate and we got to make decisions quick. But I don't know, man. And then there's also maybe this part of like, everyone wants to have a steady, consistent salary. And like in DAOs, it can be kind of competitive. It's like, well, if this guy's coming up, is he going to take my job? And I think we also have to wrestle with that sort of like emotional, psychological security. But part of it might be switching to an abundance mindset of actually there's plenty of work to do. And as long as good, valuable work is getting done, it should all get funded. And I think DAOs and crypto in general might be a place where, if we can do that abundance mindset anywhere, it's here where there's so much money compared to the number of people. I don't know.
Yeah, I just kind of wanted to touch on something you said there, and that is kind of that competitive mindset, where people might feel like people behind them may oust them, may succeed in ways that they couldn't, and so they will be replaced. One of the things that I've talked about a lot, especially in Bankless DAO, because for me, I'm a season 0 member there, so I was there early. It's funny because I'm probably the oddity that didn't come to Bankless DAO by way of the airdrop, because I had never actually read the Bankless newsletter. So a bit of alpha there. I actually came by way of Clubhouse because I, at that time, was hosting a club on Clubhouse, and I invited some of the kind of origin instigators of Bankless DAO to the club to talk about DAOs, because I was convinced that was the future of work. I was convinced that is kind of what was going to take Web3 to the masses, right? Because everyone works. That just feels like there's a clear parallel there, but it's just a matter of narratives. And so I came in and I joined Bankless DAO early, and I have been kind of, if not actively contributing, a fly on the wall, listening, still coming into the community calls almost on a weekly basis. And one thing that I talk about regularly is leadership. and being able to nurture, foster tomorrow's leaders at DAOs. I think one of the things that I've not seen done very well is creating systems for developing leaders in a DAO so that we don't have to depend on the same 5 people to do everything, because that tends to be what happens in DAOs. And those people burn out. And when they leave, several things happen. One of them is, of course, a lot of things break because these people were what were holding up these decentralized organizations, right? But the other thing is the morale also drops because suddenly they feel like, well, if this person left, then there's probably no value in this organization or in our mission that we were working on together. I've seen it happen several times. And so I feel like one of the things we need to do better is foster leadership in DAOs. And I think that's just one of many things that we can improve on.
Absolutely. How do you think we could get there? How do you train young leaders in the DAO?
I think it partly goes back to what you said, where it's kind of like this permissionless work where anybody can come in. There are incentives in place to be able to reward people for the work that they do. Just continuing a little bit more of that, but maybe in a bit more in a more systemized way, where there are systems in place to ensure that anybody coming in through the top of the funnel, which by the way is super easy, you just got to put something on, your social media, drive a little hype, and people will go in, right? And especially if there's no token attached, if there's a way to earn your way in, you can definitely drive a lot of attention to your organization, a lot of people to come through. But if there are no good systems to onboard these people, and I've seen a few people do it right through, weekly onboarding sessions, through, where there's these individuals in an organization that help guide young members to find their way, right? I don't know why the word is not coming to my mind, what these individuals would be or what they're called.
At one time we called it people ops. I don't know if we still call it that.
I think it's a little bit more human than that. I think people ops is such a robotic word. I don't like it.
Yeah,
it's at the tip of my tongue, but I can't think of the name of the people. But anyways, they're guiding these individuals to find their way, right? Because it's also can be very confusing. Discord is not the way. You just have all these channels, and you're like, where do I go? Where do I start? Where do I find value? Where do I create value? Right? To borrow words from Awaki, who has done a fantastic job at talking about like how we can reward people who create value, and then rewarding them, right? And I think RPGF is a perfect example of how you can do that. Retroactive rewards, where anytime that you create value, there are funds in place to be able to fairly remunerate you, right? And I'm definitely I've benefited from those systems, and so I think we need to do more of that. And not to keep talking about Kevin Owaki, because this is not the Kevin Owaki show either, but he recently launched Easy Retro PGF, I think it's called, which is like anybody can like set up their RPGFs, which I definitely think Crypto Sapiens wants to implement. And I know Mosaic, through the systems that we're building, is kind of implementing some of that same thought process into what we're building.
That's awesome. Easy Retro PGF has been such a cool experiment, because I think Kevin spun it out of helping or creating one of the user interfaces that badge holders used in RPGF3. And then, taking that sort of Gitcoin mindset of how do you let anyone do it and make it easy for them to do their own route. I'm excited to see what kind of experiments come out of this. I feel like a hard question in that conversation is, how do you decide who your badge holders are? But that's also like a fun conversation where it's like, well, there's so many different ways we could do it. We could let in people who, for some communities, it might be like, do you hold our NFT? For some communities, it might be like, do you hold at least X amount of our token? Or have you been a member for a Y amount of time? Or something like that. Or it could also be like, these people have a position within an organization, they get 10 badges, they go out and they give it to people. Maybe you bootstrap a web of trust or whatever it is. But that's a That seems like a fun thing to do for a community to decide who are your decision makers.
I mean, that's the hard part, isn't it? The whole governance thing, I think, is what is part of what's broken in DAOs. It is maybe sometimes a little too inflexible, sometimes a little too informal. I think it's a matter of finding a balance, but also not being so strict with it because communities change, markets change, and so I think it needs to have some level of flexibility to allow it to be dynamic when it needs to be, but to be a little bit, but to again, it's all about systems, right? I mean, I think that's just what it comes down to. It is setting up systems in order to be able to say, like, look, this is just the way that it's going to operate. There are systems in place for us to like be flexible to it when the time comes to it. One of the things that I've been very happy to see mature and get some level of adoption is Joke Race. I love gamification of systems too. Like, so allowing some gamification in systems, so not of the systems directly, but that gamification is part of the system. And this idea of like enabling people within your community to participate in, kind of electing what is a kind of who would be a valuable contributor, who should do this, or what should we fund, but also introducing a bit of play into it, where it's like, well, actually, it's not the first thing that you voted for, though. It's the second outcome that's going to be the one that we're going to go with. I think that's really fun, and I think that just I don't know, it makes it fun, and I think sometimes governance can't be fun.
Right. A lot of times governance is like writing essays on a governance forum instead of just participating in conversations in a cool way. And also, I think like one of the things to Joke Race's credit that they've done really well is create a great UX. Like, it is easy to just get started on Joke Race, and it's cool that they do it that way. Plus the branding, the naming. I mean, who doesn't want to participate in a Joke Race? It's like, yeah. And it'll be cool to see what other governance mechanisms keep spinning up.
I mean, for me, the last couple of days more than most or more than before, but certainly I've been there for over a year, and that's Farcaster. I'm loving the experiments that they're running over there. Like, the development kind of community that is built there over years since Farcaster started through today, and the acceleration of those developments in the last couple of weeks is just mind-boggling. And I'm starting to see, maybe within the last week or so, some of these types of dynamic governance experiments coming in using the Farcaster social graph, which I think is kind of the superpower of decentralized social, right? Yes. So that's really fun, and I'm really excited to see that.
Yeah, Farcaster has been by far the hottest project of like of 2024 so far, and they have a lot of really cool things going for them. Humpty, you mentioned the social graph. Also, they've had frames come up really recently, where just like so many open source developers are jumping in, creating cool things on top of it. I feel like this is part of the superpower of crypto. It's enabling open source software development. It's enabling anyone to come in and build things on top of it. And, Farcaster has done it so well, in part because of the way they built their data layer. Like, the fact that they're a protocol-centric view that lets anyone build a client on top of Farcaster, I think is one of the most bullish things for its future. Like, right now, I'm using Warpcast. I'm sure you're probably using that client as well. But it's so cool that, like, Warpcast is very Twitter, but there's someone else who's built a Discord version of Farcaster or a Reddit version of Farcaster that you can, pick the user interface that you like the most. But then also your identity, your data travels with you regardless of which interface you're on. It's not like, Twitter has its database, Reddit has its database today, Discord has its database, and they're all separated and they're disconnected. But the Farcaster protocol is just sharing it all widely. I'm so bullish on that. Curious what makes you most bullish on Farcaster today, both in like the data perspective and maybe as a user too.
I'd say the developer ecosystem. I think you hit it on the head in terms of like these open source experiments. It's I don't think it's coincidence that Chris Dixon's book, Read, Write, Own, which I literally finished within 24 hours, which my wife was like surprised because it takes me quite a bit to finish a book, mostly because I'm distracted with work or reading blogs that are relevant to the stuff that I'm building. So books kind of are on my night table and they're just stacking. And I'll read them for like 10 minutes before I go to bed and then I get sleepy. But I finished that book really quickly. One, because I think he did a really good job at making the very hard things accessible. So he didn't really use technical jargon. He, as he said, wrote it for a smart high schooler. So I think that's one of the reasons why I read it fast. But in it, he talks about, he talks about open source a lot. In fact, I think I tweeted this, but I know I definitely I casted this on Farcaster, where I said it was as much an ode to open source software as it was Web3. Like the way that he talks about open source software in that book, I think is enough for you to pick up that book because it reminds us of really kind of some of the values that were in place back when Web 1 was being developed that were completely forgotten during Web 2, where everything became closed source, especially when it comes to the data layer. Companies like Facebook and Google just consumed that privately, not just monetized it, but built things to, facilitate their growth exponentially. And I think Web3 is reminding us that it's these open source systems that allow us to be able to create better playgrounds for us to engage with, monetize together and grow. And I think, Farcaster has an open graph. You can access that through their hubs, or you can, which you can spin up and become a node in the system yourself. Or there's players like Nanar, which I'm going to have on this podcast too. I'm going to be having Rish, one of the co-founders there, on the podcast. And we're going to be talking about kind of the importance of opening up these systems for people to build on top of. So for me, that's what's the most exciting because I wasn't super early to Twitter. I knew of it and I eventually registered, I think like 2013 or something like that. But I do remember there was a lot more things you can do on Twitter when the API was open for everybody to play on, right? In fact, things like retweet wasn't a Twitter invention. That was like was an open source project that eventually was, added to Twitter. And so it's this ability to grow a platform, an ecosystem together that's really exciting. And I think it's going to be the future of social as long as we keep supporting it.
That was one of the really cool eras of Twitter when there were all these devs building on top of it. And now you look at Twitter and it's like the APIs are either super expensive or closed. I mean, like to get like a decent API now, I think Elon's made it like $5,000 a month. And it's just like, oh my God, that's crazy expensive, especially for most devs who are just like, maybe wanting to experiment with Twitter as a side project. It's like, I'm not going to invest $5,000 a month for a side project. But what's so cool, I think, to your point about how like Twitter made all these features by developers who weren't even working at Twitter, and then they integrated all of them. With Farcaster, you can have those developers make those features, and then you can, any client could for sure like merge that into their client, but also you can't turn off someone else's client because the protocol's there. Like it's impossible, I think, for Farcaster to go the same way as Twitter and prevent people from getting access because it's there. Like the protocol's built for anyone to get access to it. It's like that transition from, Google used to have the phrase "don't be evil," and Web3 is "can't be evil," and hopefully that's like where Farcaster goes too. But then like one thing I think about open source software developers that we worry a lot about at Gitcoin is just the ability for them to get paid for their work. Because not only should you be able to have those fun side projects and stand them up and build your Farcaster frame, build your competing client with a shared data layer, but you should be able to get funded for that open source software project. And this has been the big problem of open source software throughout time, is that it's hard to get paid for it. Why did Web 1 turn into Web 2, where people are monopolizing and pushing on advertiser dollars? Because they needed money. Like, if you're building open source software and it's out there for free and for public and for anyone to use, it's really hard to have a business model. And that's part of the reason I think a lot of these things went closed source. And even today, a lot of open source software models are dependent on still on altruism and charity and getting people to donate to them. And what we're trying to do, I think in Web3 is make it so that incentives are aligned, that you need to promote and support your dependencies in order for them to keep growing. And not only is it a part of the culture, but it's a part of the mechanisms we're building and the work we're doing. And I think I'm bullish on this for RetroPGF, which is sending a massive amount of money towards open source software projects. I'm bullish on it at Gitcoin because we've been doing this for 5 years. Me personally for 2. And just while there are still a lot of kinks to work out, I think if you look at how easy it is to be an open source software developer and earn your first dollar in Web3 versus in Web 2, it's humongous difference. In Web 2, it's almost impossible to make any money as an open source software developer unless you're working for an already established project. You can't today start your own project in Web 2 for open source software and get funded. But in Web 3, it's really easy to earn that first dollar. You can usually do it within a few months at the most, which I'm bullish about.
Yeah, I mean, so I'm glad that we're kind of coming back here, because this is kind of where we started, and we're talking about funding for open source software. I mean, if Gitcoin is known for anything, it's that, right? I recently read the blog post. I think it was Kyle who posted it on the Gitcoin forum, talking about the end game for Gitcoin, entering the end game. And in it, he talked about kind of really what Gitcoin is all about. Finding product market fit over all those years, and really just trying to find how or trying to see how they can go ahead and really accelerate towards the things that they do best, and that is grants. And so it sounds like 2024 is going to be focused around grants a lot more than it ever has been. And I'm really glad to see that, because I think that that's really, in my opinion, and I think maybe many people's opinion, this is why that blog post was written, that Gitcoin grants are a valuable part of this ecosystem and its growth. And so I wonder, we talked about RPGF, right? And so that was really, I think that is primarily seen as Optimism's play and how they provide funding to the masses. Again, Crypto Sapiens and Mosaic being benefiters of that, full disclosure. And of course, through Gitcoin grants too, for both projects. So I wonder, if you had a crystal ball, how do you think Gitcoin grants is going to evolve over the next year? Yeah, I'm going to have you do that. And over the next 5 years, as we see, this funding being a little bit more easy to get, and definitely being a very important tool of Web3.
I expect most of the trends that we're seeing now to continue, but to grow and burgeon. And the biggest trend that we've seen over the last year is more communities running their own grants rounds. And that is a huge transition. So Gitcoin's gone through 2 phases. We've gone from 1.0 to 2.0. And what that really means is that 1.0, we were a centralized system. We were kind of Web 2.5. We could run quadratic funding rounds, and we did. And we basically did them for other people. We would go out, we would fundraise, we would raise money from Yearn, Optimism, Coinbase, A16Z, and we would take that money, put it in a shared pool, and then projects would come, they would get funded on our platform, and they would, do crowdfunding in order to earn a bigger and bigger share of the matching pool. And in those days, we were the only ones who could do that. We were the only ones who could fundraise, run the rounds. We control the software. We ran it ourselves. Now in Gitcoin 2.0, we've gone through this transition where we've created a protocol, which is called the Allo protocol. And what it does is it makes it so that anyone can permissionlessly spin up their own quadratic funding round. And then we have our client, GrantStack, which is the user interface on top of this permissionless protocol, so that now anyone can come in and start their own round and get funded. And we've seen already a lot of communities, not even, in the past, to run a QF round, you had to talk to us. Now it's like, you don't even have to talk to us. Maybe you're a techie like me and you're like, talking to people is scary, and I'd rather just sit down in front of my computer and type away, preferably with a ton of music playing. But now it's you just start that. So we've seen right now the Zuzulu is running their round. They're raising funding for their events, for their tech. We've had Polygon running around for infrastructure. And I think what I would hope is that in 5 years or 10 years, it's super easy for anyone to really just start raising funds for their community. And sharing this QF mechanism on how to decide, to let the community decide for itself how to distribute that money. That would be what I'd be really excited to see in a few years.
Okay, so I wanted to draw parallels here because I think it's only fair, especially as we've been talking a lot about Farcaster. And so for those of you who have been keeping up, Farcaster is to Allo protocol as Warpcast is to GrantStack. Is that right? Is that what I'm hearing?
Yeah, definitely.
I love that. So basically at this point, though, GrantStack is the only client that you can use to be able to create your own rounds. But anybody, because Gitcoin loves open source. So if you don't know, gitcoin.co, go check it out. They are the open source king, in my opinion, in Web3. Definitely been advocating it from the beginning. You can potentially fork Gitcoin, the GrantStack, and create your own client if you wanted to run on top of Allo protocol. Would that be correct?
Yeah.
I love that.
I haven't tried it myself, but I think that is true. And that's possible because there's a shared data layer. And just as more and more people access the data, I think they can do more cool things with it. The other thing that's I love seeing cool projects doing things because, we've been on the track for the protocol and the client for a while. But, you mentioned Nanar earlier and how Farcaster partners with Nanar. One of the really cool things they do that I love and I saw and now I'm copying is that they push data to Dune every day to make it really easy for analysts to access and do stuff on Farcaster data. So as one of the data people at Gitcoin, I saw this and I was like, that's a great idea. And so, we're right now talking to the Dune team about doing something similar with Gitcoin data and just pushing a ton of it to Dune and making it really easy for any analyst to jump in and start playing around with the data and doing what they do best.
I love how we're 40 minutes in and now we're going to get into this really meaty discussion of data because this is really what I geek out about. Okay. I'm not the data dude on X for no reason. I definitely am a data geek. Look, my background is in information technology. Many moons ago, I operated my own information technology consultancy out of Los Angeles. And so infra, tech, data, I'm here for it. I just tend to do content pretty good too. So, don't hate. Anyways, this whole pipeline that you talked about between Nanar and Dune, I really want to dive into this because I also want you to talk about regiondata.xyz, okay? Because you're not getting out of here with really talking about this important and valuable tool. How, is this really what's going to be pushing some of that data? Or is this just another front end for some of the experiments you're going to be running with Dune and data as well?
Yes, great question, and hyped to dive in. So Regen data is basically a cloud instance where we've gathered a ton of really valuable Gitcoin data and made it accessible to anyone. So like you can create an account, but it's a permissionless account creation. Like anyone can go in and create one. And then you can access all this data. So you can see, on Gitcoin, who's given what donations to which projects, what are the projects, what is all the data that they have, their GitHub repositories, their Twitter handles, how much have they raised, how much have they funded. You can see a lot of data on Gitcoin Passport, which is our Sybil resistance solution. And what we've done is put this all in one database so that it's just really easy for people to get that data. Because one of the hard things about a protocol like Allo or any protocol is, you have your on-chain data and then you have your off-chain data, and you need to be able to make a connection between the two of them. So a lot of the on-chain data is the donations, the votes. With quadratic funding, a crowdfunding campaign plus matching funding, the crowdfunding is all on-chain, the matching funding is on-chain. But what's not on-chain is the meaning of the addresses, the labels. Who is sending money to who? What project is this? If you want to know that we're funding Ethers.js, you have to know that that address belongs to Ethers.js. If you want to know what Ethers.js does, you have to read their project description, which is this long bit of text that we can't store on chain. So that gets stored on IPFS. And so what Regen data does is it leverages some of the internal tools we use, like our indexer, to combine that IPFS information with on-chain information and make a database that most of us in Web 2 or Web 3 would be used to seeing. And now with Dune, we'll take this data that we've gathered in Regen data in a SQL database, and we'll push it to Dune so that it's also accessible there. Because one of the things we run into is, sometimes people don't like creating accounts, even if it's free and quick. There's a lot of people, a lot of analysts already on Dune. So we just, my belief is that if we put it there, it'll just enable more people to do cool analysis. And the other thing that's amazing about Dune is it comes with all of this on-chain data. So now you can take these addresses that we have that are voters or grantees, and you can look at their whole on-chain history, because Dune enables all of that naturally in their SQL interface and database. And so, I'm really bullish to see and run my own experiments on using this data. There are very cool things we can do in order to detect Sybils better. There are very cool things we can do in order to just track project funding. One question people have had for a long time is, in terms of grants, crypto enables transparency. So let's transparently track where the funding goes after it gets sent to a project. And maybe it's not that spicy, or maybe it is.
So much alpha. Okay, so obviously the podcast name is Onchain Alpha, and that's literally what we're getting here right now. And I'm loving this idea of like distribution through Dune. And I'm going to do a terrible job at quoting Dan Romero, who is the co-founder over at Farcaster. They're getting way too much free marketing here today. But anyways, he basically says that he solves for distribution, right? And I think when you talk about all of the work that's gone into building Regen data, the product, and then doing the same on Dune, you're basically doing just that. You're solving for distribution. You know where the customers are, right? The people that are going to be able to utilize this data, and then can leverage that data to kind of build their own insights, right? Their own dashboards, which is kind of like the superpower of Dune. So yeah, I'm a big fan of that. Obviously, over at Mosaic, we're leveraging a lot of that data that we've either called through the APIs or lives on chain or comes from Regen data. I'm excited to see kind of how we can amplify or accelerate some of the work that we do, expand some of the work that we do using the data that you share on Dune as well. Because I'll tell you right now, as you know, we're looking for data engineers, and a lot of them ask me, can I do this on Dune? So it would be really great to see or point them towards those dashboards and saying, yes, you can. Go to Dune, model some of this data, and let's use that on Mosaic as well. So I'm very excited that on a personal level too.
Whoa, that's so interesting. I did not expect that. Can I access this on Dune? But it makes sense to me, actually. That's cool.
I recently interviewed someone as recently as yesterday, and they basically were talking about Dune and all the things that they could do there because they're primarily versed in SQL. And so for them, that's simple. And I was like, oh, like Dune is definitely doing things that are obviously making this space a lot more interoperable and, kind of connected, composable because of the data that they surface. Not that it's not available elsewhere, but they're just bringing that all together in one place.
Yeah, they make it so easy to get started. I mean, which is just amazing. And I also love that they have it's so easy to see someone else's query and then just push the fork button and then, edit it or build on top of it. And I feel like, we've had this running theme throughout our conversation of like open source software, open source development, and shared data layers. And, Farcaster and Dune, for all the free marketing they've gotten today, totally deserve it. They totally deserve it. Like they're just doing such an amazing job with how easy they're making it for anyone to build on top of the shared data. And excited to, follow in that lead with some of the work we're doing at Gitcoin.
Yeah. I mean, so anything else like with Regen data, anything specific about Regen data that we didn't talk about? Because I don't want to miss an opportunity to really, kind of promote the work that you're doing there as well.
Yeah. So Regen data exists to make it really easy for any analyst to get started with Gitcoin data. And the reason for that is because before Regen data, many analysts, in order to get started, had to do a lot of data engineering. They had to gather their data sources. They had to clean them. They had to process them in order to actually get started. But Regen data does all of that work for them. Thank God for our amazing engineer, Bliss, who built all of these pipelines that takes that data, processes it, and makes it available. And the other really kind of cool part of it is that in addition to Gitcoin data, we've been adding in data from other sources to sort of overlap. So like, one of the cooler data sources, in my opinion, available in Regen data is POAP data. So like you have a lot of voters, well, what POAPs do they hold? Because POAPs are a great signal for what communities they're a part of. And as we sort of evolve quadratic funding, we're really interested in what communities people are part of, because we want to provide greater matching funding to projects that have support from more diverse communities. But overall, Regen data is something that myself as an analyst, I really needed. And it's been amazing to actually just like have us build it internally and then make it available also to the community to get involved and do their own contributions. And I'm hyped to see also what happens. Like you can get started on Regen data today, regendata.xyz. You can ape in and start building things. And if that interests you, then you could also potentially join this group called Regen Learnings.xyz, which is a monthly meetup where we talk about just like what we're learning using Regen data or, other data. But just like the idea of creating a shelling point for people interested in Regen stuff to learn things together. So, we have people from Optimism, we have people from Gitcoin, we have people from the Ethereum Foundation, all sort of like just get together once a month to talk about cool things they want to work on, find collaborators. It's a really good space to be in.
Why am I not there yet? Oh my gosh.
I'm sending it to you right now.
Please do. Like, that seems like a place I should have been at, like at least for 6 months. So thank you for sharing that.
It just started last month. Literally,
okay.
That session was like 2 weeks ago. So
okay. So I don't feel too terrible.
More alpha.
Yeah, more alpha for sure. So, it's funny you talked about POAPs because for me, the next question I wanted to ask is kind of what is some of this on-chain data that you're seeing that is valuable and kind of things that Gitcoin wants to use more of? I completely agree. I think POAPs have been out for so long. They've pervaded the entire ecosystem. They're used by different projects just because of how simple they are to use. They're also used by non-crypto projects, which I think is kind of fun, right? Because you can get them via your email too. So any other data? I mean, I'm going to also preface this that we at Mosaic are using EAS because I think that some passport stamps are being issued there too. So, but are you seeing kind of some other interesting developments with on-chain data that you think, oh, that would be really fun to use, or we're already considering adding to Gitcoin, to Regen data?
Well, I'd love to dive down the EAS rabbit hole in a second, but I guess the one other thing I'll mention, any person who works in Web3 data has run into this issue of the data is not very human readable, right? Those addresses, you need to know what they mean, who uses them. So one other really good data source that we've been using is called Arkham Intelligence. And what they do is basically provide a data labeling as a service. So they've mapped a ton of entities to addresses using public information. So for example, in order to verify my governance forum profile, I had to tweet, I am Umar Khan and I control this address with my wallet. So Arkham's did some of the hard work of saying, all right, if you've tweeted your address, we can link that Twitter to that address, and now we know who that wallet belongs to. And so, we also use that Arkham data as another source for us to label data and know who it belongs to. And that's really valuable for us, especially in some of the Sybil resistance work we do, because as we try and build this social graph and separate bots from humans, of course, it's incredibly valuable for us to know who the humans are and who the bots are. And that's really important for us, in part because of quadratic funding and it being really necessary for us. If we're providing more funding to projects that get support for more people, we need to know who the real people are. But then also one of the fun things we've seen is if we build this technology of Gitcoin Passport in a Sybil resistance way, not only is it useful for quadratic funding, but it's useful for people doing universal basic income, one person, one vote. Airdrops. A lot of airdrops today, are gamed by people writing scripts or doing just like airdrop farming and airdrop hunting. And there are some communities that really want to reward only good, positive actors for the authentic amount of activity that they've done. And there are some that just want to reward how much on-chain activity you have. So, everyone picks their flavor. But that's one of the things Gitcoin Passport tries to do. And it's also one of the spiciest, in my opinion, data problems in the space of just like actually telling Sybils from humans. So a lot of the data we built in Regen data is also tailored to make it really easy for people to become Sybil hunters and contribute to that civil defense.
That's good. Now, you said you wanted to dive into EAS too, so let's dive into it. Like, what are your thoughts on it? What are some of the experiments that you're seeing? I mean, including whatever Gitcoin's doing that is fun and interesting.
Yeah, so I think you mentioned, on the passport side, we use EAS for putting some stamps on chain. Stamps are these like credentials that verify how human you are, and some of those get posted on chain that Mosaic uses. And
I minted my stamp on chain with a pretty high score. I think it was 25. You can go and look at that. The provenance is on chain.
Nice. And that's so cool. I think about EAS. It's like, it's so general that you can put almost anything on chain. I think one of the really exciting areas for this is impact and putting attestations of impact on chain. But also, I'd love to learn more about how Mosaic's using EAS and just like, Humpty, what do you think about it?
Yeah, I mean, I think that there's a lot more that can be done. I'll start with that because I think one of the things that I initially thought how Passport was using stamps data was that everything was being provisioned on chain. And I was like, yeah, awesome. That's going to be super easy to like work with because, on-chain data tends to just be a little bit easier to work with than with like off-chain data. But what I learned is that there needed to be a user action to basically attest to your passport on chain. So that means that there's not a lot of, data out there to work with. But how we started using EAS was, interestingly enough, at Permissionless at the hackathon, where Gitcoin had put on a bounty for using on-chain data and coming up with an interesting or novel solution. And we found that Passport had stamps on-chain using EAS. And so we used that to provision rewards to users, excuse me, based on the scoring value that they had achieved with their Passport. And so we did that through tiered rewards, and each reward was developed to incentivize the next level of resistance, if you will, in scoring. And so what we discovered then and continue to discover now, it tends to run like around 15, 20, and 25. Anybody with 25 and above is like, you're just a master at this, like you're doing something right. 20, I think, is kind of where people average, only because that for the longest time was the way to unlock the most rewards from the pool, Gitcoin Grants pool. And then 15, there's a resistance there too, so people seem to get stuck around there. And so the way that we saw it is like, hey, you got 15, great job. Let's celebrate the fact that you went and actually did this. But there's another incentive you can earn to be able to, but you need to be able to do something. You need to do an action. And again, this goes back to that challenge that Kevin Owaki put out, where he was saying, reward people for creating value. So bringing in some of that degen mentality, but, with Regen kind of rewards, saying, hey, you're creating value in this ecosystem. Sorry, go ahead.
I was just saying the degen to regen pipeline.
Yeah. Exactly. Airdrops, right? Like, there's a very strong degen culture there, but, you can definitely leverage that using Regen values. And that is, if you're creating value to an ecosystem using a product, you should be rewarded and come get your airdrop. And it should be retroactive, because I think when they are retroactive, they're a little bit more difficult to gamify.
Yes. Yeah, you have to have that evidence of positive work in order to get it. Right. And I think, one of the things that's really cool about this and what you're doing, similar to Joke Race, is gamifying it. It's just making it so that like there is that incentive, that motivation in a manner that I think most people coming up today are used to, because we've all played video games now, and like it's a system that works. And it's a system that's motivating. It's like I have a very clear, tangible, actionable goal. Otherwise, in Web3, it can often be like, it's a chaotic world, and I don't know where to get started. And so, like, it's cool to just like give them that tangible, action-oriented thing that also comes with the reward, and play on dopamine.
100%. Look, we got to make it fun. Anyways, we're reaching really here the top of the hour, and we've actually reached it now. And I know you got to go. So I want to give you a chance to let us know what we missed. And if we covered everything, then where can people find you? What should people go? What's the first thing people should do after they're done listening to this pod?
Well, first, just thank you so much, Humpty, for having me, for creating this space for Crypto Sapiens, and for everything you do generally to just like have good conversations with people. You're really like a master of this. And I think you're also just like one of the great community builders in Web3. And for me, I'm at Umar Khan ETH on Twitter. And, visit, if you're not familiar with Gitcoin, visit us at gitcoin.co. Check out regendata.xyz. And if you liked the idea of that working group that's meeting once a month, then check out regenlearnings.xyz. And I think that's it for me.
Well, Umar, thank you. It's been a pleasure talking to you. Honestly, this has been eye-opening, but also incredibly fun. Appreciate your time, and we'll see each other on Farcaster.
Thanks.
Cheers.
See ya.